Hello. Hi, everybody. It's Kathy Frey here from IMCO, from the International Integrative Maternity Healthcare Organisation, and welcome along to this week's webinar. And I'm thrilled to have today with us Sapna Matharu. And say hello, Sapna.
Hiya, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. Hi Kathy. I'm really excited about talking about this topic because it's really close to my heart.
Oh, and it is such a unique topic. Well, a very specialized area and so important. So I'm very interested to learn from you today. That is for sure. So look, everybody coming on in, as you sign in, if you go into the chat section and let us know whereabouts you are in the world and what your role is as a health professional, or maybe you are a mum expecting, or maybe you're a mum who's had a trauma from birth. So yeah, we would do let us know whereabouts you are in the world. And of course, down the bottom of the screen is also our chat box. Sorry, our Q&A box, I should say. So if you've got any questions for Sapna, please just type them in there. So what I want, just to give you a little introductory overview, particularly for those that will be watching this webinar a bit later on, just give you a little bit of background on Sapna. So Sapna Matharu discovered homeopathy through the birth of her first child, and it's not long ago that she just had her third child. And since embarking on her journey with the modality of homeopathy, she's learned so much about how we end up with dis-ease. And the powerful healing ability that we do possess innately within ourselves, which is what homeopathy is all about, really. And if you're not familiar with homeopathy, then you'll learn a bit about that today. It's about getting the body to heal itself. So Sapna has witnessed the incredible power of homeopathy as a catalyst to unblock the healing ability at all stages of life. She believes that with the right start, we can all thrive physically, mentally, and emotionally as human beings. And this is the root of her passion to help people with fertility during pregnancy and with the birth of their babies. But the topic that we're going to be talking about today is exploring really that prevention and healing of birth trauma with homeopathy. So we're really going into that sort of postpartum area of it. So tell us more about what, maybe give us a little overview to start with, Sapna, as to what it is that you're going to be sort of going over today with us.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to set a scene for you. I'm going to talk about why I became interested in birth trauma, why I kind of think it comes about. I'm going to explain a little bit about homeopathy because I know a lot of people haven't come across it before, and also it's quite misunderstood as well. Then
yes, very misunderstood.
Yeah. Then I'm going to talk a little bit. Well, I'm probably going to focus mostly on the prevention part of birth trauma, and then to kind of end it, I'm going to talk about healing from birth trauma. And I'm going to do that by presenting a case study. I've actually got 3 case studies, but depending on time, we'll see how we go. And I may only have time to do one. But yeah.
Oh, that would be great if we can get through that. Yes. Okay, we'll try and get, because the case study is always so interesting.
And it's good to kind of, see how homeopathy works and understand how it works in practice as well. And that's why I think case studies are a really valuable part of, doing webinars like this and engaging.
Absolutely. So tell us, why did you become interested in birth trauma?
So I became interested in birth trauma because I think that birth should be empowering, and it shouldn't be a traumatic experience. When you give birth to a baby, it's not only, you birthing a baby, you're born as a mother, especially first time mums.
Absolutely.
And I just think that a lot of the times that, when we think about birth and when we talk about birth, the focus is always on the baby. You spend 9 months as a mother being pregnant and everyone's kind of looking after you and attending to you. And then the focus just changes immediately to the baby. And the mother kind of almost gets left behind. And if you know, it's such a powerful experience giving birth. And if it's positive for you, then it's going to be amazing. And it gives, both you and your child the right start in life. If it's negative, then there's so many issues that come out of it. So there's bonding, issues with your baby. There are issues later down the line. And in homeopathy, we see this quite a lot because if we're treating a patient for something chronic, you know, long term, at some
Mm-hmm.
point, if they've had birth trauma, that comes out. And then you've got to kind of,
Yes.
unwind that with them as well. There's also a recent study that was done by the Western Sydney University that shows that kind of the more interventions that a woman goes through in birth, there's a link with long-term illness in the child. So it's quite
Oh,
interesting.
right.
Yeah, so there's kind of physical things as well as emotional things. And
Yeah.
then, also when a woman suffers birth trauma, they can kind of go on to, develop postnatal depression, and that can stay with you for years and years and years. There's, patients, not my own, but from other homeopaths, I've heard 25 years down the line when they've unwound their case, it's about postnatal depression from a birth they had, 20, 30 years beforehand.
Mm.
Um, and I also found out this like amazing stat from the midwife who kind of helped me for the birth of my daughter. She said that there was a study of women who had dementia, and overwhelmingly one of the memories that they had was of their birth. So we hold that forever, even in cases where we've kind of forgotten things. And I think that that's why it's such an important thing. So, to begin with, I thought that birth trauma started in the birth room. I thought it was about interventions, it was about loss of control, the dehumanization of women, emergency C sections, and the cascade that leads to that, the fear that you've got for the safety of your baby. But when I kind of thought about it a little bit more, when I started talking with patients specifically who had birth trauma, I kind of realized that that's not the case. It starts somewhere else. So then I started thinking, right, what is it about this birth scenario? What's going on? So I kind of looked at the animal world, and I kind of, if you watch any animal program, any mammal that is giving birth just totters off by themselves. They go to like a nice dark place, and then they emerge a little bit later with the babies. So I thought, was there any time in history that we did that as humans? So then I did a little bit of research, and I did find some evidence of this. So there was and I'm going to read out these kind of quotes from these books to you. So there was a observation of Native American women, and what was said was they depart alone to a secluded place near a brook or stream of water and prepare a shelter for themselves with mats and coverings, where provided with provisions necessary for them, they await their delivery without the company or aid of any person. And then there was a tribe in Cuba, in Colombia, they were called the Cabello. And the observation was, I have seen a pregnant woman leave for her manoic garden, and that's like cassava plants, and return later in the afternoon with a newborn baby. And then the last one was a Peruvian tribe, and it said, when the moment of the delivery approaches, the woman looks for an isolated spot. Generally, she goes into the forest, and she gives birth without help or witness. This form of self-reliant delivery is a sign of feminine pride and decorum. So there's loads of kind of evidence in tribal cultures that people go and give birth, and women go and give birth without assistance. And it's kind of something that's like about their power and their pride. The things that kind of struck me with these descriptions was firstly the word delivery. I've got a real bugbear with the word delivery, because we don't deliver babies, we birth baby. And that irked me quite a lot. The second thing,
I might intervene in there. We have a quite famous midwife in New Zealand, who she's passed now, Joan Donnelly, and that was one of her favourite sayings was, pizzas are delivered, strong women give birth.
absolutely.
And I think that is a very, very important part of the narrative that birth practitioners are using. And I think that anybody that's holistically minded knows that anyway, don't they? And they'll always be talking to the woman, you know, during their antenatal period about the fact that she's going to be giving birth. And it is so irritating. And I've commented numerous times to my obstetric colleagues, if I hear them say the words, you know, you're coming to the hospital to be delivered type of thing. And yes, and I would say to them, which is kind of blunt, but delivering is yanking out, sucking out, or cutting out.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And yes, that is a baby that is being delivered. But by the obstetrician, although at the same time the woman is giving birth.
Still giving birth. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the woman gives birth, and an obstetrician may deliver a baby, but a woman doesn't deliver a baby.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's all right. I just had to hop on that horse as well, that bandwagon, because I'm so.
I know, and I think so many people feel the same, like when they're thinking about this. And semantics is really important, and it's something I'm going to talk about later, because there's other things that kind of shift responsibility, and I think that's quite an important thing.
Yes, and it's the women themselves, isn't it? Not having that conversation where they're talking about, oh, I'm going to be going to the hospital to get delivered. No, you know, you're going to go to the hospital for you to give birth, or you're going to the birth centre or whatever, wherever you're going. But it's them realising that it's something that they are doing, not something that needs to be done to them.
Yeah, and I think there's a massive education piece that needs to be done about that. But you know, that's like a new project that I want to work on, but I could go on forever.
Yeah, we could. So tell me, what do you believe is, you know, the root cause of a lot of the trauma? Well, I guess you kind of covered around those normal ones that we are aware of, and then of course you're talking about the ones that we're not aware of. But what do you think is the biggest contributor to it?
Well, I think, okay, so I think there's three things. What we need to do is go back to what happens when we give birth, okay? And there's this hormonal dance that plays out that involves oxytocin, endorphins, prolactin, adrenaline. And our endocrine systems are so delicately balanced that this is such a sophisticated thing that happens. So if we focus on oxytocin, when you're giving birth and when you go into labor, it begins to increase really gradually. So it's kind of giving your body a chance, you know, to get into and get used to those strong contractions. It's not whacking you with them straight away, because that would be a massive shock for your body. And also, you know, oxytocin is responsible for this like loving feeling that you feel when your baby is born, and you look at this newborn and you're like, oh. And also physiologically, what happens is, you know, your body's trying to make space. You're trying to get this space to be able to, you know, birth the baby. And movement is really good because of the twisting that happens to the baby during birth. And, you know, you really need to be in tune with your body and listening and following what it's kind of doing. You need to be safe and feel safe in order to do that. And you need to kind of really honor that women have the power to do this. This is our thing, you know, we're designed to do this. And I think that society's focus is moving away from this a little bit. So if we kind of, and it's almost about power. And I feel like our power has been slowly stripped away from us, and it's kind of now impinging in the birth room. And I say now, it's been happening for quite a while. So, for example, in the UK, up until the 1950s, most women used to give birth at home. And then now it's an overwhelming shift to hospital birth. Now, I understand kind of all the statistics about safety, etc., but we are safer kind of than we ever were. But yes,
Well, that's absolutely right. And the thing that's one of the things that has made it safer to give birth at home than it ever has been, right?
yeah,
Is not just the access to things like ecbolic drugs for hemorrhaging, but also the fact that we have ultrasounds. So, you know, the idea that somebody's got placenta previa, where home birthing would be absolutely, well, giving birth is, could kill that mother and that baby. But
yeah,
we didn't, but back, so, even though most women were giving birth at home in the UK in the 1950s, and before that, they were doing it with the risks of still not knowing where the placenta was, not knowing if there's two babies on board. So now that we can eliminate a lot of those risks, and between blood tests and ultrasounds, we basically know the difference between a healthy normal pregnancy and one that does have complications.
yeah.
And so there's never been so much lack of necessity to be in hospital.
Yeah, it's not a medical event. And the problem is it's now mostly a medical event that kind of occasionally happens naturally, when really that should be flipped. It should be a natural event that occasionally requires medical assistance.
Yes.
And going back to kind of the semantics, so also, we talked about kind of giving birth and delivery, but also, women used to say, I'm growing a baby. And that's about nurturing, and that's about something you're doing. And now people tend to say, I'm having a baby. It's like I'm having my nails done. Someone else is doing that part for you, you know? So it's a mindset shift as well.
Yes.
And then there's a concept of the ticking clock. A woman has to do this, meet a man by this age, or have a partner by this age, get pregnant by this age. And because we're so used to it, it almost normalizes it when we get pregnant. And then there's this magic 40-week number that's kind of been made up.
I know, this whole obsession around,
It's insane.
and I actually am, myself and an obstetrician run a Facebook information group called Ask the Maternity Gurus. And the amount of people, the women that will put on there, a comment along the lines of, I'm desperate to know if I'm 5.5 or 6.5 weeks pregnant. I really need to know, which am I? Thinking, wow, this is so not important. In the big scheme of everything, it's not something to be spending worries about. It'll be like, because my scan says this, but my last menstrual period is that, and what is it? I'm so confused and I'm so worried. And you're like, honey.
But I think this is the point, though. The worry starts then, because then
yes, it absolutely does.
Then thinking about coercion into induction. And it starts right at the beginning. And I think it's really difficult. And even women that say they want a natural birth, what I find a question, like this overwhelmingly frequently asked question is, how can I naturally induce my baby? And people are saying, 25 litres of like raspberry tea and the pineapples and blue or black cohosh. And, homeopathically, people are also asking. And I am like, you cannot induce your baby homeopathically. Homeopathy works on, like, it's a symptom-based thing. And
actually, we should go into that topic. Why don't you start some explanation around homeopathy?
So, what is homeopathy?
Basically, the vibrational tinctures.
Sorry?
I refer to them as sort of vibrational tinctures.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's a really, I've not heard that before, but you know,
Okay.
there's value in looking at it that way. So
Mm,
homeopathy is holistic. It's a holistic medicine. And what I mean by that is it's not just about your physical symptomology. It's also about kind
mm,
of what's going on up here, your emotions, and mental symptoms that are going on. And what happens when we have a trauma, whether that's a physical trauma or an emotional trauma, we kind of, some people get stuck in that
mm,
and they're unable to kind of move on. And I think, you know, sometimes you've kind of heard of people saying something like, you know, since he left me, I've never been the same. Or, you know, a long time ago, I broke my leg and I've just never been the same. And what we do is we look for those etiologies. We look for that in order to kind of treat people. And it's really important the way something starts. Because if you then become into a stuck position, a remedy is like a key to unlock that and help resolve that stuckness. And it's very individualized. So it's like a bespoke form of medicine. It's about what the symptoms that you are presenting. And I'm going to illustrate this. So last week I did a live Instagram chat with an independent midwife, and I talked about a remedy called pulsatilla, which could be useful during transition, because that's the time when women tend to get more overwhelmed. And afterwards, loads of women kind of got in touch and said, "Oh, can you tell me about pulsatilla? I want to stock up with this before I kind of go into labour." And one particular woman said to me, "I have tried to research it, but all I can find is stuff to do with earaches." And I said, right, so this is how to illustrate homeopathy, because it's not about a disease name, it's about the state that you are in. So with the remedy pulsatilla, its typical kind of symptom picture, if you will, is someone who's in a birth scenario, is someone who's kind of really clingy to their birth partner. They are, you know, likely to be crying, saying, "I can't do this alone, I can't do this alone," and just clinging on and not being able to kind of like let go of you. They also might feel really worse if the room is warm and stuffy and there's no kind of open windows. But you can have that with an earache. You know, if you think of a child with an earache, a child can have that. If you think of somebody with a cough or a cold, they can also have that. So that's remedy state can be applied to any kind of illness or symptom picture that we call a disease. So that's the kind of beauty of homeopathy. And I think that, you know, for birth keepers, using homeopathy in kind of practice during pregnancy and during birth is going to be easy, because great birth keepers, the thing that they do best is observe. And what you need to do in homeopathy is observe. So, you know, all that's left to do is kind of know the symptom pictures, and that's it. You're there, you're away. Um, and, you know, you could be helping your clients with something that is, you know, has no drug interactions. So it doesn't matter if you're kind of taking gas or air or any other drugs, and it's, you know, safe and it's gentle and it's non-toxic, and you can use it at any stage of life. So, you know, the anxiety over that just doesn't exist. Um, so I think, you know, now maybe I should kind of talk about treatment or prevention of kind of birth trauma. Um, oh, Kathy, I've lost, I can no longer hear you.
Oh, here
Oh,
we go.
there you go.
Sorry. Yes, so that would be great, is to learn a little bit about how you know that how homeopathy can help with preventing, and then maybe lead into your cases that we might be able to go over. That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay, so I think there's different stages. And, you know, when I was talking before and talking about the root cause of birth trauma and saying I don't think it starts in the birth room, I think it can start kind of before you're even pregnant. The root causes can be there. It can be during pregnancy, or it can be in the birth room during birth. So when I was kind of reading up some more statistics, and if a woman has had previous trauma, then they are 5 times more likely to suffer from birth trauma. And by previous trauma,
Wow.
yeah, and
Okay, that's huge.
it's huge, and it's really interesting because that could be any trauma. That could be a trauma in childhood. That could be something to do with domestic violence. That could be
Yes, because when
states of.
I think about, when you're doing a medical history on a woman as a new client, you'll be asking her, does she have any history of mental illness? And at some point, you need to be making sure that she is safe from family violence. But the question of, have you ever had significant trauma in your life? That's not a question that's asked. And generally, and when you think that those women are then 5 times more likely, that is
Yeah,
huge.
yeah,
So we
it's
should
massive.
definitely be asking that question.
Yeah, I mean, the question should be asked, but then I think what what modalities are in place to be able to kind of act upon that.
Yeah.
You know, that's
I
like a
guess it would be a case of maybe being upfront with the woman and saying, look, because you have been through a trauma, you are at higher risk of a trauma. So we want to really put a good plan in place.
Mm. I mean, that's a possibility, but I wonder whether that's something that will just contribute to anxiety and fear, which is something I'm
Right?
going to come to
Potentially.
later. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, homeopaths deal with trauma on a daily basis because people come to us because they've suffered a trauma. And when we think about trauma, in an isolated sense, we think about something really big. But again, it's dependent on the individual and their kind of perception of that trauma. And I think that's really important. And one of the cornerstones of homeopathic philosophy is when someone has suffered a trauma, they become more susceptible to trauma. So it's really interesting, this statistic about 5 times more, and how it kind of, is on parallel with homeopathic philosophy. So in some circumstances, what I'm trying to say is that root cause of that birth trauma could be way back there. So if a person, a woman comes to a homeopath for treatment before she's even pregnant, we can start treating that traumatic experience so it doesn't become a trigger when she finally does give birth.
Right. And
And
what how early in the gestation would it be ideal for that woman to be seen?
for previous trauma,
Mm. I
I
mean,
think even,
basically, you'd prefer to see her as soon as she knows she's pregnant
well, I'd prefer people to kind of
or before they're
come
pregnant.
before they're even pregnant to resolve
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
I think unfortunately, as a society, we don't make these connections. We don't kind of
Mm.
think that far ahead, and we don't think, well, what's going to happen? How is my past situation going to affect me? Um, you know, when I give birth. So there's a difficulty with that. There's definitely a difficulty.
And I
But
think there's also a bit of putting the head in the sand as well, about the whole birth. It's often not until the woman gets around that sort of 30, 32 weeks, and then suddenly she's really starting to face the fact that the pregnancy is coming to an end,
mm-hmm,
and that the baby needs to come out. And
yeah.
yeah, whereas she's sort of been cruising it prior to that often.
I mean, I'm a prime example of that. With my first child, I kind of just was like, right, I'm going to have a C-section. Didn't even think about it. And I ended up giving birth, in a midwife-led unit. And the only reason I didn't give birth at home was because my waters broke and I wasn't having any contractions for 5 days. So I had to go in. But
Mhm.
I said to them, under no circumstances am I coming to the labour ward. It's the birth centre or nothing. And I went in and, and I had a relatively uncomplicated birth. I gave birth to my son, and my active labor was only 4 hours when it actually got
Brilliant.
going.
Yes.
But,
Yeah. Brilliant.
the point is that was me and a long time ago. But that's kind of most women.
Mm.
And you're right, it is around the kind of 33, 34 week mark. And I think that's when midwives start to talk about it and healthcare professionals start to talk to women about it, unless there's some kind of complication like gestational diabetes or signs of preeclampsia or anything during the pregnancy. So the next point is pregnancy. Now, I think it is easier to treat people during pregnancy because it's an acute thing. It's not like chronic, it's not long term. It's, you know, there and then, and it's easier to resolve because it hasn't had time to bed in. So homeopathy is brilliant. You know, I use it for my pregnant clients with, you know, things like SPD, nausea, even HG, you know, so they're not vomiting all the way through their pregnancy. And because it's based on symptoms, it's also, you know, if caught early enough, preeclampsia. However, you know, that's a really serious condition. So I would never, ever advocate, oh, don't worry, don't tell your healthcare professionals about, you know, your preeclampsia, just use homeopathy. It's a modality.
Right.
And, you know, but if you've got something really serious, you need to consult healthcare professionals. And I think that, you know, I want to make that really clear. I'm not dogmatic about only homeopathy and nothing else. But during pregnancy, what started to happen now is you have scans, you have appointments, you have kind of, you know, very early on, people start to talk about induction. And I'm going to tell you what happened to me with my kind of first child, just to demonstrate, you know, how this occurs. And the emphasis is always on risks.
Yes.
Very rarely do you get a balanced picture unless you ask for it.
Very rarely. Yeah.
And it's a problem.
There's a way that you can word things so that you are not, though a health professional, unfortunately, particularly I would have to say our obstetric colleagues, especially the private ones, that there's a way that they can deliver that information that skews it.
Absolutely.
And they're not actually lying, but boy, it's not quite, you know, it's certainly not a balanced comment to have made.
Absolutely not. I think
they will use fear to their advantage.
Yes. And I think the prime example of that is, you know, if you go over 42 weeks, the risk of stillbirth doubles. Now that's true. But if you look at the actual figures, it doubles from 0.01% to 0.02%. And if you're over 40, I think it goes from 0.02% to 0.04%. That is an overwhelmingly unrisky statistic. But when a woman hears the word doubles, they start to freak out.
Yes.
And then they go down the route of induction because of safety and anxiety and fear. And it's unnecessary. You know, they could have given birth without an induction. So, you know, I think what ends up happening is things like this and the focus on risks begin to kind of create anger, sometimes like rage in women, grief, and also mostly anxiety and fear. And this is what happened to me with my, you know, with my son. 3 months pregnant, went on holiday, had a bleed. It was brown blood. At no point did anyone say to me, actually, if it's brown blood, you may be okay. It was always, you need to go for a scan. You need to go for a scan. I went for a scan. Oh, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with the baby. Oh, but you might have placenta previa. I was 3 months pregnant. At no point did anyone say, the placenta, your baby's going to grow and the placenta's probably going to move. We'll just track it. They didn't say that. They said, you need to come in for another scan. A couple of months later, going for another scan. Oh, your placenta's moved. Great. Oh, but you know what? Now you've got low amniotic fluid. Right. Okay. Anything I can do about that? No. Which is not true. I ended up drinking loads and loads of water, getting really properly hydrated, went back. Oh, your amniotic fluid's fine. Oh, but now your baby's small. Oh, and also your placenta's calcifying. So it just went on and on and on. And, you know, for context, my first child was an IVF conception. So we're already anxious because this is everything for us. And secondly, I'm 5 foot tall. My baby is never going to be massive. It's just not going to happen. So you know, and at 36 weeks, it was like, right, small baby induction. And I said to the consultant, okay, when are you talking about? He said, now. And I, you know, in my head, I was thinking, I've got a lot of weeks for this baby to grow, you know? He's
Yeah,
been on
and
a,
if it's small, is it not a good idea to let it grow a little bit more?
I mean, that's what boggled my mind at the time. I couldn't get my head around that.
I mean,
So
there are changes within, with the biophysical profiles and things that in Dopplers that we do where we know where the baby is suffering. But so there are situations where the baby is better out than in. But we do have to question the amount of, we have to seriously question the amount of inductions that are occurring.
yeah, meddling, it's meddling in something that doesn't need to be meddled with. So what happens here is you're getting the anxiety and fear, and you're getting these negative, imbalanced emotions. Okay. So if you want to then go into labor and you've got these imbalanced negative emotions, what that is doing is increasing your cortisol. And if you've got an increase in cortisol, your oxytocin is low. And what do you
Yes,
need to declare? Your oxytocin.
oxytocin. And the enemy of oxytocin is cortisol and adrenaline. So, yeah, we
So
don't
there
want
you
you
go.
stressed. Yeah.
And women are stressed. They are stressed, they are anxious, they are worried. And, I think if you have homeopathy during your pregnancy, and, again, there are loads of other methods, but, we're talking about homeopathy here, it can help alleviate that, and it can help give you your kind
Yes.
of power and confidence back. It can help with feelings of anxiety and fear and rage. And, I'm going to give you an example of a patient who at 39 plus 2 was told, had a call from the consultant midwife, wasn't even 40 weeks yet. And I think she'd probably had a couple of kids before, so it wasn't her first child. And the consultant midwife spent half an hour talking to her about stillborn babies, how she'd seen them in her 20-year career. This woman had nothing wrong with her. She had no risk factors. She was not high risk. She was going to give birth at home. And the consultant midwife just talked about stillbirth for half an hour. The
For what
interesting
purpose? Was
to
she
try and
trying to persuade her to come into
induced.
hospital, persuade her to be induced?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So, and there was no reason, there was no kind of evidence-based reason for this. Now, I think she'd previously spoken to the midwife who was coming along to the antenatal appointments, and they was like joking around saying, oh, I think you're ready, you're probably going to go into birth early next week. And she said to me, I feel that as well. She said, this is not my first baby, and I feel my instinct says that it's going to happen. After this call, it did not happen for her. And then she
Yeah.
found herself so angry that this woman had done this to her and put her in this state of anger. So she was prescribed something called staphysagria in a very high potency. She went into labor an hour later after taking the
Fantastic.
therapy. The feelings of rage disappeared. And she went into labor, and I think maybe 4 or 5 hours later she gave birth to her son. So
Brilliant.
it's so powerful what it can do. But if that hadn't happened, she would have reached 40 weeks, the pressure would have piled on, her anxiety would have increased, and then before you know it, she's lost the power, tipped over the edge, and she's down the induction route when she didn't really need to do that. It could have been prevented. So I'm just glad that she got the staphysagria.
Yes.
So the final prevention kind of scenario is in the birth room. And it's really difficult because of the individual nature of homeopathy for me to give you examples of how this can happen. But I say to all my pregnant clients, when you go into labor, get some arnica, crush it in some water, and sip that throughout your labor. It is brilliant for pain management. And I'll say things well, I've got like a download sheet that I give them, but they're, you know, remedies for exhaustion. People do get tired, you know. The average
Yes,
labour
absolutely.
isn't, the average labour is kind of between 15 and 18 hours. It's not, you know, 4 or 5. And that's tiring for women, you know, really tiring.
Yes, and so often before women go into establish into that strong active labour, they've already had 1 or 2 nights overnight of latent labour, so they're
Yeah.
already tired. And you can often, yeah, particularly with those first babies, they do take a long time. Now, I know that the fact that you mentioned that you have a sheet, I know that people's ears will prick up on that one and go, oh, can I get a copy of the sheet? And we will be sending them some information. Those who are registered for this webinar will receive an automatic message tomorrow with some details on it. But for those who are watching this webinar later down the track, how would they maybe just let them know your contact information now?
Well, they can just go to our website. It's a free download. So, you know, it's www.thewildhomeopath.com. And if you
Say
just
it again, say it a little bit slower for everyone.
Oh, sorry, it's www.thewildhomeopath.com.
The Wywood.
Wild.
Oh, wild. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure everybody hears. Okay.
Thewildhomeopath.com. So
The
yeah,
wildhomeopath.com. Wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a free download that you can get from
Yes.
there. But the other thing I was going to say about birth, you know, before I talked about transition and remedies for transition. So, you know, if you're in a state where you're kind of really angry, and this is what we see on film all the time on the TV, a really angry woman screaming and cursing at her husband, saying, "Get me this," and then he gets her whatever she's required, and then she throws it back in his face. That's chamomilla. That is a chamomilla picture, you know. The weepiness I talked about before, that's a pulsatilla picture. And then sometimes people are just like really apathetic. They just look really lethargic. That's kind of like, you know, an indication of something like gelsemium. So when you get to see that, you can give the remedy. They come over that hump and then they can carry on, you know,
Yes.
and go through labor and birth their beautiful babies. So, and you know, birth is such a high intensity time that you can see the remedies working like really quickly. I've had calls from independent midwives, you know, while their clients have been in labour, saying, right, you know, I need, for example, it'd be great if we had stronger contractions. Okay, give them some coliphylum. This sounds like a coliphylum thing. So, you know, 5 minutes later, thank you, done, established contractions, go.
Oh, absolutely. And I can second that because I've done a lot of birth centre and home births and used a homeopathy a lot through it. And particularly, I would put my hand on my heart and say probably that homeopathy has saved hundreds of women from instrumental births or instrumental deliveries. Because I'm talking about particularly primates, they're first because they sort of get to this point where they've been pushing for quite a while, and the energy just saps and their emotions sap. And boy, you know, we use a little bit of homeopathy and 15 minutes later we've got a baby.
Yeah.
Their whole body just re-energizes and it comes out of places they didn't know that they had reserves. And it is amazing to watch. Amazing to watch.
It is so amazing to watch.
So absolutely. And without that as the tool on a tool belt that I've had as a midwife, you know, I would have found myself in a situation where that woman needs an assisted delivery because there's really nothing else I can do at that point. But homeopathy, amazing. But again, as you say, it's like it's using those remedies based not just on the symptoms of the physical manifestation on what is happening, but also the emotionally what's happening. And that's how you learn to identify, you know, which is that right remedy. And if you get it wrong and you give the wrong remedy, well, there's no negative effect. It's just you're not getting the positive effect that you're wanting. And sometimes you're sort of in a place of going, well, is it this or is it that? You know, I'll give it both. You know,
And I think in a birth situation, do it, because
what does it matter?
You're going to see that change really, really quickly.
Really quickly.
And that's why in that scenario,
in 5 minutes.
The emotional picture is so important, because that's what you're seeing most. You're not going to see like all the physical manifestations like thick green discharge and a runny nose. What you're going to see is the mental emotional picture in a birth scenario. So that's why it's so important to kind of know that, to be able to use it.
And as a birth practitioner, there's probably about probably 7 or 8 remedies that you should kind of have in your kit as real basic, that would be very useful over labour and birth.
I think
just thinking about the woman themselves, though, that it is very because often as women, it's you may have being pregnant, you may have a very open mind to homeopathy, but you may not have access to a midwife or an obstetrician who is as open. And I think that one of the things that you can definitely do with homeopathy, because I did it myself, is that you can basically teach yourself a lot as well. And absolutely right. I mean, our children are adults now, and none of them have ever had antibiotics, and I'm not antibiotics, but it's just that I would use homeopathy as the first cab off the rank. And so if they've got a sore ear, well, I'll use whatever is the right thing for that, and then look, hey presto, they're fixed. So they don't need anything else. But you can do that for yourself. So I think that women can look up those, and in fact, for those of you on here, those watching hopefully are already on the database for IMCO and already receiving our newsletters with upcoming webinars and whatnot. And we've actually got a new book out which goes through a lot of these remedies. So women themselves can take charge and say, okay, I know this is my emotional state. This is the remedy I need.
Well, you're better off kind of, doing that, giving your birth partner the information while you just
Absolutely.
get on.
Yes, when you're actually in labour, that is correct. Yes, let them run that ship.
I mean, I had to do my own at my last birth, because my husband just kind of left the remedy kit there and didn't even look at it. So I was just shouting out remedies, going, right, I need some gelsemium, just give me some gelsemium now. So, but this is the point, when we're talking about birth is something that a woman does, it's part of that kind of higher level of recursion about taking the responsibility and having the responsibility. Because using homeopathy, you can have that, it's not this, I'm a homeopath and I'm going to control everything. I'm very, very much about educating women and people, actually, children even, to learn about homeopathy and use it in acute situations for themselves, because it's just so valuable and it's just brilliant. So
and it's such a great, as a mother with children, using it for your kids is amazing. Amazing. Yeah, it makes it just basically sort of softens the harsh edges on because everybody has their own constitution, everybody's got their own weaknesses and strengths, and be that physically but also emotionally, and those things that can kind of get in the way of us being able to feel contentment and cope with things. And homeopathy is just amazing. So if we haven't jointly convinced you, if you are not familiar with homeopathy, anybody watching, I can tell you some amazing stories about the kids and the incredible rapid responses that it creates. But also I have, as I say, I've seen it hundreds of times with women in labour. Amazing.
Well, have we got time to just tell you this this case study about treating?
Please do. Yes. Okay, let's go.
So this was a woman who came to me, and she didn't come to me for birth trauma. Her son was 9 months old, and she said to me, I am a fit woman. Now, she was really overweight, but she was really fit. She used to lift weights, and she used to kind of carry sacks of potatoes when she was a chef on her shoulders and stuff. And she said, you know, I can't walk 5 steps without having heart palpitations and shortness of breath. And I was like, okay. And she said, that's my biggest thing. I just can't do it. I've got a 9-month-old. He started to crawl. I can't even pick him up. I said, okay. So when did this all start? And she said, well, you know, it kind of started after he was born. So I said to her, tell me about your birth. What happened? This woman is a hypnobirthing teacher. So, you know, she had set up everything for a home birth. She was very kind of well educated, well prepared. She had a doula to help her. She'd, you know, got a birth pool in her living room. She had a video camera set up because she wanted to kind of film this. And it was all great. The setup was great. What ended up happening is at some point during her labor, it started to kind of unwind, and she looked at the camera and didn't want to be watched. And then she didn't like that. Then she started to panic. Then she started to get scared. So after,
And
I
she
think,
was probably feeling some failure coming in there. Like,
possibly,
I'm failing, because this is her recording it that she would then go and show her students later, potentially.
yeah, absolutely. There was definitely, I think, you know, one of the things she said was, I'm a hypnobirthing teacher. How could this have happened to me?
Yeah.
You know? So she had all of this. She ended up being transferred, and I think her baby was born by a forceps delivery in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about the emotional kind of aspect of this, and she says, you know, that's not a problem for me. I've worked through that. You know, I've used other kind of techniques to work through that. But what her body was telling me was it hadn't been resolved. What her body was showing me was she was still in a state of fear and panic because she was having heart palpitations. She couldn't pick up her baby. And, you know, when your heart's palpitating, that's fear, that's panic, that there's some anxiety going on there. So I gave her some aconite primarily for that. It was a really high dose of aconite. The next time she came to see me, she was a completely different woman. She was, you know, the palpitations had stopped. She'd regained her strength. She was able to carry her child. And we just spent, you know, half an hour just laughing and talking as just human to human about stuff. And it was nothing to do with her case. And, you know, I'm going to put my hands up and be transparent. That is one of the best cases, like one set of remedies and it's all resolved. And it doesn't often happen like that. But, you know, it just
usually it's like, what don't we talk about? It's like an onion, and it's usually about peeling the layers off.
Layers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. But she was still stuck, you know, stuck in that state 9 months later. And she just needed that kind of remedy to unlock that state and for it to be resolved. And it was just so brilliant, you know, it's just brilliant to watch. So in treating birth trauma, you know, mostly it's kind of longer. And I'm kind of in the middle of a study where I'm specifically treating women who have had birth trauma because it's so close to my heart. And, you know, I think the thread that runs through it is a negative emotion at some point, which hasn't been resolved, whether it is grief or fear or anxiety. But it, you know, and it's slower moving. It's not right. It's resolved now, and you see these little kind of things shift, and then you know the remedies are working, and it's beautiful.
And we've got a question coming in asking about training for birth practitioners on homeopathy. Now, obviously, you know, there's different things available around the world, but because of Zoom, you know, everything has kind of opened up, so it's more possible now than ever before to be in one country and learning something from another country. So what are your thoughts with regards to access for birth practitioners to homeopathy training?
I think they should all do it. I honestly think, you know, I think they should all do it. I mean, I run a kind of 2-hour kind of birth preparation course, and I do that for prospective parents but also for birth workers, and it goes through remedy pictures of 18 different remedies which are useful during birth and also for postpartum as well. you know, for things like after pains, and also, you know, if you've hemorrhaged, for example. So loads of stuff afterwards, and also the healing from the birth.
Right. And do
But
you
yeah,
do those on Zoom?
yeah. I mean,
Yes, yeah.
because
So anybody can tune into those. I know that Irene Chain Kalinowski has a correspondence course that's based out of New York. And also, but I would have to say, without trying to push it again, but certainly the Oh Mama book that we've just had released as well that's actually really a handbook for maternity healthcare providers on those types of remedies. So that's, you know, a really good one to be holding on to as well.
It gives you a dimension, because, you know, you've got a different kind of viewpoint on birth, because there's like a medical kind of expertise as well. So to match that up is
Yes.
also useful.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that is really kind of nuts, crazy, is that when you look at midwives who have particularly high normal birth rates, they will always be using other tools in their tool belt.
Yeah.
So there will always be these other things that they are relying on as well to help them make that possible. Yet those are the things that are not taught to midwives in their midwifery training,
Yeah.
which is insane. That we are, you know, we absolutely should be teaching our midwives in our midwifery training all the medical aspects, but there needs to be I agree with you, a huge turnaround in those university degrees, that they are having more information about alternative and complementary therapies, because, you know, otherwise, yeah, it's silly that it's not basically included in there. But we are running out of time. Is there anything further that you would like to add before we wind up?
I think I've covered everything that I wanted to. I mean, like I said before, I could talk all night about this.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to go and squash it into, you know, a little slot. But you know, if people, you know, want to talk more or need more information, then you know, I do free 15-minute calls, so you can just chat if you want to, and find
Brilliant.
out more about homeopathy and how it can help you. So yeah, there's
Look,
always more information available.
thank you so much, Sapna. Thank you so much. It's just been wonderful having you here. And we are just so on the same page with homeopathy. And it's so great for everybody to realize that it's not, you know, about always those physical symptoms. It's about that mental state, which, and you fix the mental state, and the side effect is the physical symptoms abate.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. We are, you know, such an interconnected being. We know that.
We definitely are.
Yes. So
We need
thank
to
you so much. And thank you to everybody who's been here live today. And we hope you've enjoyed this webinar, because without you, the audience, you know, it would feel a little pointless us just talking to each other. And I look forward to seeing you another time at another webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you.
lovely rest of your week. Bye.
Bye.